As homelessness exploded across New York City in recent years, nonprofit and shelter executives solicited billions of dollars in public allocations and private donations under the guise of charity. According to a New York Times investigation, some even paid themselves massive salaries, contracted services out to private companies they or their families had vested financial interest in, and appointed their own relatives to high-paying jobs.
According to the reporting, the CEO of one of New York's largest homeless shelters received $352 million in allocations from the city to run his nonprofit, and then doled out over $30 million of it in contracts with private companies he had a stake in.
Oof. Yeah, this is really a terrible thing. You know, we see this so often, right? Where is money? Even in nonprofit organizations, it's never a guarantee that the same kind of corrupt incentives aren't at play somewhere. I've become, also just beyond this, I've become really concerned that homelessness is becoming such a problem. It's becoming a huge problem here in D.C. I've lived in Washington, D.C. for 7 years, and the number of tents, of sort of makeshift shanty towns in all the public green spaces in the city, I think we've talked about it off camera, it's gotten so bad in the last 2 years.
It's definitely growing. That's for sure. And it's growing at the same pace that housing prices are accelerating, and so you have this entire complex that is the edifice is intellectual, social, governmental, that attempts to deal with homelessness as if it's disconnected from housing prices. They say, well, there must be substance abuse issues here. There must be mental health issues here. We need more wraparound services, and we're going to employ these nonprofits that we're going to funnel millions of dollars to deploy these services to help people get back into housing. But that's not. All of that's great. People need wraparound services. People need social services for sure. But in states where housing costs aren't as staggeringly high, you don't have the homelessness problem that you have in states where it is. And nobody would pretend to argue that substance abuse issues are worse in Washington, D.C. or New Orleans or Los Angeles or San Francisco than they are in Mississippi or Alabama or West Virginia. That no one would argue that mental health issues are worse. Those problems are national in scope. They're serious. They need to be dealt with, but they are distinct from homelessness. Yeah, the problem of the unhoused. So the problem with people that don't have homes is that they don't have homes.
Yeah. These problems are worse in cities where the cost of living is astronomical, the price of home. Often this being a government failing because there are ridiculous restrictions on where you can build new buildings, how high the buildings can be. In D.C., all the buildings can only be a certain height, and it artificially capping the amount of houses concentrated in the city. That said, there is a serious mental health component, at least to the problem in D.C.
For sure, but it's a classic correlation causation fallacy.
Not being homed, you're not having access to a home, you're more likely to have substance abuse and mental health issues. The people who are unable, because of the low wages and the high price of housing, the people who are unable to make the numbers work for themselves at the end of every month are more likely to have substance abuse issues or mental health issues or both. Right. And then so people look at that and say, well, clearly the homeless people, the unhoused, have mental health issues and substance abuse issues. Therefore, it's those issues that is causing them to be without housing. And I understand why people would think that, but no, that's not what it is. Those people in an environment where housing was more affordable would be able to afford housing. Yeah, because we're talking about the people at the margins. People
those
at the borderline.
The people at the margins, when you push, and when there's a recession, it's those people who are going to fall out first.
And it becomes a public safety issue, not just for them, but for crime and for we're seeing spikes of violence in certain cities, and you have people living in these unsafe environments, and also in having mental health problems and having drug addiction, and you have stabbings and you have violent episodes and things like that. It's not safe. It's not the way any city should be conducted. And I feel like there's a real lack of will to tackle this problem. I mean, these are usually very heavily democratically run by the Democratic Party, right. Municipalities, jurisdictions, and there's just not a lot of will to grapple with this problem, and it's a serious problem.
Right, and instead of dealing with the cost of housing, what they'll probably end up doing in these cities is saying, boy, it really pains us to do this, but we're going to just crack down and we're going to recriminalize poverty
right.
and homelessness, and you're going to find that enough voters like, you know what, fine.
Right.
And then they'll just
and then it goes wrong, and then there's some blowback to it when there'll be some police officer roughing up a homeless person on tape, and then there'll be a march and a protest, and we'll go back to ignoring the problem, and that's not the right way to do it. Right? I don't want it. Right? I don't want an aggressive police dealing with this.
Because you don't solve the structural problem.
You don't solve the structural problem.
Displace it elsewhere.
Right, and it's messy. People get hurt that way too. Mm-hmm. We don't want that. But it has to be dealt with because it is a problem.
And these aren't the only people hurt by high housing prices. They're the ones that are most visible as people are walking around the city. But it's hurting everybody who is having a hard time either buying a home or affording rent. It's just sucking all of the disposable income and then some out of what people are making month to month.
Liberals who are feel-good type people who are sad about the condition of the homelessness need to vote for politicians who will allow building of new housing, and even if it's next to your favorite antique historical diner or something, nope, we're going to bulldoze that and put up a 20-foot apartment building. Sorry, that's what has to be done to solve the problem. And liberals need to allow them. Right, even large, as big as, yeah.
We'll have more Rising for you right after this.